Alessio, who's a technology leader, entrepreneur, running his own startup, amazing ex-AWS manager and solutions architect, CTO with 25 plus years of experience in technology. Hello, Brainiacs! We're recording another episode of our BrainBooks show. This time we will do it in English. We do that once a year with a special guest. This time our special guest is Alessio Nobile, my ex-colleague. Alessio is joining from Amsterdam. As always, we will have here my co-moderator Jasmina. Jasmina usually joins from Zagreb in Croatia, and this time she's actually decided to go skiing on French Alps with a beautiful snow and beautiful weather. Before we move to Alessio, Jasmina, how are you?
I'm fine and I'm still alive. So skiing is quite good. There is a little bit less snow that I was expecting, but today is getting more and more. So I hope after this podcast I'm going to ski.
But I've heard if you want to get more snow, you should actually probably go to Amsterdam, right, Alessio?
Perhaps. Good morning, Armin, Jasmina. Good morning. Thanks for having me on the show. And indeed, well, here in Amsterdam, we had the past 3 days of heavy snow, which is quite unusual for the Dutch standards. So perhaps it just means if you need some snow,
I should come to you.
Take a train to Amsterdam, yes.
Yeah. Thank you, Alessio, that you're joining this time in our show. I'm looking forward. Basically, I think 2 months ago, we booked you because you're very, very busy. And I'm so happy that today you're having time to share your experience.
Thank you for having me. Really looking forward to the conversation. Super excited.
For our audience who don't know Alessio, so Alessio is a technology leader. He used to be a startup founder. He used to be a CTO, head of development, architect at AWS, manager at AWS. And then recently also Alessio left AWS, so Amazon Web Services, to start his own new startup and new idea revolving about AI. We will talk about that again, or in a few minutes. And Alessio, first of all, I said welcome to the BrainBooks podcast. Happy to have you here. Just to kind of kick off and start the discussion, maybe you can just ease us in and tell us a little bit about your professional path until now.
Yeah, for sure. Be happy to do that. Well, where shall I start? It's been a long ride. So maybe let's start from the beginning, perhaps. So I started in the tech industry very, very early. I started working in the business of my father. So my father owned an IT business back in Italy, serving local SMBs and public administration offices. And I started very early, perhaps around the age of 16, to interact with the tech world from a business perspective, I would say. Started helping him in fixing computers, fixing PCs or cable wiring network, setting up firewalls, setting up large Microsoft Active Directory networks. So that's where I started, more as a supporting function towards him. Not because he needed me, but because I was so curious and I was so fascinated about the work that he was doing that it would just bring me along. So, hey, I'm going to this office. I'm going to do this type of work with this type of people. Do you want to come along? And the answer was almost always yes. So I learned a lot just by observing what he was doing. And eventually, in many small tasks, I started to learn, of course, a bit of the craft. I remember, my father used to, outside of doing this type of IT support type of jobs and installing networks, it was also building accounting software or administration software back in the days. Initially with basic programming languages and later on Visual Basic. And I remember I have this image of my father that would come at home and would start programming in this super fat laptop, IBM laptop. in these blue or black screens, and that was so fascinating to me because I didn't understand anything about it. So I would just spend my time next to him, asking questions that I really didn't understand any answer to. Right? He was trying to explain me what a class is, what a routine could be, what an array, what a vector is, and of course at that age I couldn't really understand. But that kind of triggered, let's say, my interest into technology. So that's where I really started. From there, already at the age of 18, I transitioned a little bit more into helping him writing software and helping him a little bit more frequently into the business was I was still starting. And then at the age of well, almost 20, I would say, I switched full time. So I started working full time together with him. We started building websites. That was already the time where the first PHP ASP frameworks started to come along. So we started to experiment with the idea of migrating some of those accounting software that he had written prior to the web. And that was already, the first experimentation of what today we would call software as a service, right? Back then, I don't think there was that definition, that term. But we were already experimenting with that. So we started migrating some of those software to PHP, and of course with HTML, JavaScript, and all the frameworks that were very early, up to the point that it became such a repetitive type of task that I ended up building my own PHP framework to facilitate the process of building. And, in hindsight, I had no clue what I was doing, but in hindsight, I was actually building frameworks that in the today world, you will probably compare to Laravel or frameworks as such.
Sorry, just to ask you, how many years ago it was that? Because you look quite young, so I don't know, it's 10 years ago, but it looks like a little bit back.
Yeah. I always get that. I look young, but I've been around for at least 25 years. So that really was between 20 and 25 years ago. The process that I'm describing, I was about in between my 18 to 22 as age, probably a little bit sooner even. So that was how long it was.
Quite long.
And to be honest, Yasmina, so for us from the tech world, when Alessio said Visual Basic, we know that was in 90s. When he says, PHP started, we know it was beginning of 2000. So for me, it was like a clear date.
I know, but there is so many people not exactly from IT world. It should be like how you are like kind of visionary, what is going to be like in the future in a way. Because for us, we just received software and then we are working in it. But for you guys, it's much earlier.
Yeah, absolutely. Good. Yeah, good observation. A good question, Jasmina. Thank you. Yeah. So if I shall proceed, that's where things started to become interesting, right? So the internet was a thing already, even before those days where I started working. Thanks to the internet, I started to participate a lot in these IRC communities. Not sure if you're familiar with IRC or Internet Relay Chat, but those were the first notion of chat on the internet. Very very raw, like would look something similar to Slack, but very very raw. Jasmina, do you remember those type of chats?
Not really. I was lucky to have friends like Ermin in that early stage and to know about certain things, but sometimes I wouldn't be able to understand what he was talking about. I was just pretending. Yes.
Guys, well, the interesting thing about those chats is that, of course, because internet back then was a topic for people that were close to technology, all the personalities, all the folks that were mostly using those IRC chats were, in essence, people with an interest in technology of all sorts. There was a particular focus on networking and security. So especially at the younger age, we would spend so much time in understanding how to take channels over from other teams, for example. And that was like a little bit of an exercise that allowed me to learn so much about networking, about security, Linux, firewalls, web application securities, and all those kind of things. Because the process of learning within those communities was so steep, just for the sake of curiosity and for the sake of having fun, that back backed, in a sense, my experience and my expertise later on in building PHP web applications, software as a service, and infrastructures, and so on and so forth. So I kind of did put those two elements together. Then once that business was going relatively well for the year where we were, started I kind of get to get bored. I was doing more of the same in repetition. So we were building the same type of software, the same type of websites. So at some point I decided that I needed something a little bit more challenging. And that's where I decided to attempt to get a position outside of Italy. So that specifically was in Amsterdam. So I interviewed for a developer position in Amsterdam in one of the first startups, which turned out in the end that they hired me. So I used my PHP framework as a way to showcase my expertise in building software. And that in the end turned out to be a good showcase. So they hired me. Within the first 6 months, I became a tech lead. This was a startup operating in the customer success analytics software. So they were analyzing customer success feedback or customer feedback across different channels for some of the most well-known OEMs across the world. Things of the Philips of the world, the Tommy Hilfiger of the world, the Calvin Klein, Canon, and other large brands. And we started in a team that was probably 5 or 7 people, including the 2 founders. And I was the second technical person within the team. So in 6 months, I became the tech lead. Within 3 years, we expanded the company from 5 to 7 up to 100 people without any external funding. And that was all due to the work that we managed to build, and at the same time, the profits that we managed to generate. So that was quite an experience. Perhaps it did cost a bit of a burnout, to be honest, because it was quite an intense period of time. But I've learned so much out of that process that really has a very dear place into my heart.
So Alessio, you were working like 20 hours per day, or you were so efficient?
Well, I wish I could count, but there have been times that really I worked so hard. Certainly more than 12 hours a day, sometimes even hitting the 16 hours a day. Really depends on the period of time.
Because, sometimes there are prejudices about Mediterranean countries and about Italy as well. Like Italians are there easygoing. But to be honest, I have some friends from Italy. They're really, really hardworking. So just to let you know, prejudice doesn't match to what is real.
Well, we like to have our own good life and our nice aperitivo, right? Don't get me wrong. The Saturday is for aperitivo. Nobody should touch it. But when we work...
And coffee time as well.
Yeah.
And to be honest, all of us from the IT industry at that time, we were actually lucky that the term burnout didn't exist at that time, right? So right. It was not coined. So that's why actually, you just kept working without knowing about burnout. So
It was just work, right? We used it. It was work. And maybe, we were younger, so the threshold wasn't yet set, perhaps. That was my real first experience. Herman, perhaps you have experienced something similar. So we were young. Perhaps we didn't have enough confidence in our own emotions, or we didn't know very well our own emotions, so we were just pushing like trains and trying to get things done. So that's what it ended up being. So I spent 5 years in this company, successful. At some point, same situation. So I basically didn't have any more challenges. It was a bit of the same. The company was doing well. However, we started to hit certain ceiling in product market fit, which we couldn't find a way to unblock. So at that time, I decided to leave, and I joined as a CTO to another startup, still in the Netherlands. In a complete different industry, that was digital manufacturing, so more industrial related type of software. A bit of the same playbook. We started very small, 5 people. We scaled, in this case, not that big. We scaled up to, I think, in total 20 people. But the peculiarity of that team was that it was fully distributed. So everybody was in a remote. We had some success, but the industry was very tough. And unfortunately, after 3 years, we didn't see a lot of market traction. So that's where I decided to move on. And I took a VP of engineering position to another company in Amsterdam that was specializing in one more industry, specifically in the brand protection industry. And that lasted very shortly, approximately 1 year, because as I joined as a VP of engineering, 6 months down the line, we got an acquisition offer. So essentially, the company got acquired by a big private equity firm from the US. And that led me to take the decision to say, okay, what do I do now? Do I decide to go into this transition, or do I attempt something new? And back in the day, back at those times, AWS was at its peak of brand awareness, was at its peak of, let's say, products. And I was very curious to give it a try. So I applied for the solution architect role at AWS. And then from there, I managed to get the position based out of Berlin. And I think that's exactly where Ermin and I had the opportunity to start working together. Beautiful journey. It took about 5 years. I had the opportunity to work, I believe, with some of the most talented people in Europe when it comes to, and not just technology, it's everybody around. There were so many fantastic business developers, sales managers, really, really beautiful people to work with. And in that experience, I had the possibility to work both as a solution architect and as well as a solution architect manager. So for about 1.5 years, I led the B2B team in Europe, well, Europe North and Europe Central, that was focusing on how to help startups in these industries to grow across Europe. And that was a lot of fun. Okay, well, we'll talk about that later. Yeah. And that's me up to now, where I decided to move on, but we'll get there in a bit.
Yeah. As you said, that's the time approximately when we met, right? So, and as Alessio said, you have incredibly smart people, and I was back in the day thinking, when I grow up, I want to be like Alessio. So because you joined before me, a few months before me, but at AWS time, that was actually almost like years, right? So he knew all the answers, all the things, where to find it, how to approach it. He was SaaS expert and amazing solutions architect. So I really enjoyed working with you. And then Alessio moved to a role of manager, right, at AWS again. So kind of, to lead solutions architects. I remember Alessio, I never reported directly into Alessio as my manager, right? But I remember that I would volunteer to join your team meeting, Alessio, just to kind of, be there and learn something about B2B and SaaS. And it was really kind of, great learning. I really, it's very impressive how you managed to put your remote team, because we were working remotely at that time. So people were scattered all over the Europe. I would join that team because you managed somehow to create that special vibe. And it's a very nice, you know, a segue to the topic that I wanted to talk to you about: how to manage teams, especially in the IT, and how to create that kind of, especially with the remote team, creating a connection, creating kind of, feeling of belonging is very hard. And somehow I didn't see a lot of managers who managed to do that. And so maybe you can share with us your experience on that topic.
Yeah, for sure. Happy to. And Ermin, thanks so much for the kind words. Perhaps you're giving me more credits than I deserve. But
No, this is honest, right? So I'm not flattering. I really,
really,
I'm
really,
saying that I think.
really appreciate it. Yes, you're right. So the the experience that I had within AWS to lead the team remotely was fun. Was fun. And I would say that there are many elements to remote teams that needs to be considered. It depends a lot on the context. It depends a lot on the actual individuals that are making up the team. But what is that I could observe with that experience is that the most important thing when it comes to remote leadership is presence, which is a bit counterintuitive, right? How can you show presence when you are far away from each other? And how can you replace the physical presence, the physical connection with remote cues, if I could use this term? And because I had somewhat of experience already with remote teams, thanks to the previous startup experience, I have done already so many mistakes in the past that allowed me to learn what is that matters when it comes to setting up a team for success. What I realized is that most managers in every company. This is not just AWS. This is just the management mindset. Is that a manager should nurture the team in order to extrapolate as much as output as possible. So typically, they tend to focus on metrics. They tend to focus on how do we get from 0 to 10, and what is that you're going to do to get to 10. And that is typically their primary focus. They don't really focus on much else surrounding what's needed to actually deliver the output. Well, the approach that I observed and tested and found out that actually operates is that I focus on output as a secondary aspect of my leadership style. My first focus was connection. So how to make sure that team members within the team can first trust each other, and not just me towards them or them towards me. But the point was, how can I make sure that I can create an environment where every team member can look up to each other, can trust each other, and can communicate to each other freely without too much friction. And that was the focus of my management style for those times. And it turned out that when you start focusing on that, suddenly output is just a very organic consequence of that. Because when team members feel that sense of belonging, they feel that respect, they respect other team members, suddenly there is a motivational kick that raises. And what that means is that people feel respected and they want to be respected because of their particular skills. And when that loop starts to kick in, then ultimately it will lead to high performance and to lead to high output. And there is even science about that if you want, we can dive deeper. But essentially, that was really the way that I was leading the team. To give you some examples, referring to what you were mentioning about joining our teams. So typically, we would spend approximately 15 to 18 hours a month together as a team, which, if you think about it for a second, in a remote setting, that seems to be quite a lot. But in reality, it was this intentionality that I was setting upon the team to be together, thinking about solutions, brainstorming about problems, having fun while doing so. And that time created the bond that was needed to actually connect, even if we didn't have the opportunity to go for a beer every day or to go for the Friday drinks, for example. So that was the trick. We would have weekly meetings that would last at least 1 hour, the dailies, which would last at least 45 minutes. And then we would have these special sessions once a month that I called Think Like a CTO. That was a little bit like the Harvard business case sessions, where we would take one of those customer cases and we would start to simulate how would we do if we were the CTOs into their places. So that created so much exchange and so much trust into each other's abilities to think in abstractions, not just about the technology, but everything that surrounds technology. So that was one of the points that helped create that sense of belonging and the connection between team members.
That's amazing. So sorry, Yasmina, to interrupt, but let me just jump in on this one. I think it's like a CTO is, that was the session that I would actually, volunteer to just join and be there with your team. But as an ex-manager, right, it looks like a huge time investment, right? So you have daily meetings, then you have weekly meetings, then you have things like a CTO. So as you said, as a manager, you focus to make your team deliver more with less resources, but deliver more. And you constantly, especially in software development, right? So this is a little bit different here. So for me, it was very hard to justify to myself such an investment into team well-being and team kind of networking, because you're actually chasing the output. This is what you said at the beginning, right? Yeah. So but I guess you would get some kind of if you that time that you invest into daily meetings, into weekly meetings, will actually kind of accumulate, and you will eventually make a more efficient team, and that will actually produce better.
Yeah, I think that's the way that I think about it today, and that's why it sounds a bit counterintuitive, right? Because why should I put so much effort if I don't know whether I will get the output out of that? But in reality, it's all about making sure that you create velocity and you speed up communication between every team member in the team. When that happens, suddenly everything else goes faster. So firefighting a given escalation, if team members trust each other, if they are well connected, you don't wait the day after, or you don't wait when you feel right. You just do it right away because you know that you can count on your team members. If you need help, if you need to ask for help, you're not afraid to ask for help because, I don't know if my team members are going to accept me. You do it right away. And in remote, unfortunately, that factor is much more stressed when it comes to have the ability to create that bonding. So you have to find other ways to make sure you have to be more intentional at building those bonding and essentially create speed in interaction. And that has been also backed up by some researchers at MIT. I can talk to it more about that if you like, but there is some research that has been done on that regard that really shows that all that matters in the end is team dynamics and not so much the output. Output is just a result.
At the end, we are social beings, and as you said, it's basically backed by science that we need to do this kind of connection to decrease the frictions between us. But what I wanted to ask you, Alessio, when you team, what do you think is the maximum number of people that you can manage that way? Because probably you had 10, 20 people that you are doing this kind of activities, but what do you think about maximum? Because we cannot stretch this to 100 people because we cannot have these kind of connections, no?
Absolutely. It is very hard to do it in big settings. So I think there is this sweet spot of 7 to 8 team members within a team, but that is regardless of remote settings. This is generally a number that has been identified as the good balance of how many direct reports a manager should have. Nevertheless, practices that you can apply can, of course, be extended in bigger cycles. So if you're leading an organization that is bigger than a 7 and 8, you want to make sure that the managers that you're going to put in place, that are going to extend, in a sense, your leadership, are going to understand that this is the mechanism that they should focus on. So it's a lot about how the leadership structure is going to be based. And that doesn't mean that suddenly leaders shouldn't care about output and shouldn't focus on that. But it's more about where do you start? Output is a consequence of a team that is capable and that has the right tools to deliver. It's not the output is not just the consequence of hard work, right? So you can do as much hard work as you want, but if the conditions within the team are not ideal, that work will always be limited. So as a leader, I think you should really focus on that mindset and make sure that first you get the basics in place. And then once those are in place, you will start already the output to be at a good level. And then, of course, you can then start shifting the boat into the direction that you want. But I would say connection and people first. So to your point, you're right. It's not easy to do it in a large org, but I think that's oftentimes where the challenge is. And that's why we see so many companies asking employees to go back at the office, because it is very, very hard to have that effectiveness at scale. It really is. There is no solution.
About leadership as well. It doesn't mean if you are in the office that you will have that culture, what you mentioned. It's about the person who is leading teams. So I think we need to cultivate that view.
100%.
And maybe on the team size, it's interesting to mention this Amazonian concept called two pizzas team, right?
That's right.
No, Yasmin, I'm not sure if you know what it is. So, but basically, so two pizzas team is a team that should be oversized so that you can actually feed it with two pizzas, right? I mean, I can manage two pizzas on my own usually.
That's what I was thinking. Like you're talking about guys, how much they can eat. So
those are American size pizzas,
oh my
right?
God.
Not European.
Alessio, we are against, I think, American pizza. No, we cannot accept this kind of proposal. Sorry, Annie.
with
Anyway,
you.
so two pizzas team is an Amazonian concept, right? So it says actually that the team size should be the size that you can feed it with two pizzas, which means everyone gets one slice, which is then approximately between 8 and 12 people that you can actually feed with two pizzas. So, and it's not, I mean, this is, we call it in Amazon two pizzas team. And when you create a team, it's actually two pizzas. So that's actually max 12 people. But you also have in Scrum, so as an ex-Scrum Master, when you build your Scrum team in software development, your team should be between 9 and 12 people. Right? So, running a team as a manager that has 20 or 30 people is not actually, you need to start creating then hierarchy and team structures. So you wouldn't actually run 30 people on your own. That's not good for the people neither.
Talking about food, I don't know, Alessio, have you been to Bosnia and Herzegovina? But you should try cevapcici if you go there.
Okay, I will add it to the list. I never had the opportunity to visit it. Maybe
you
maybe
should.
I should find a good reason to do so then.
We can organize something, don't worry, business trip or things like that, speaking on a conference. But do you, before we move to the next topic, maybe just quickly, Alessio, did you notice a difference between running software development teams versus heterogeneous teams or the teams that are actually sales teams or things like that? Do they have different vibes?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I would say that the scope of work determines a bit the vibes and the structure of the team itself, right? And in a sense, you could also say that the scope of work also kind of determines the type of individuals that you're going to have as part of the team. So I'm pretty sure that there are differences. Now, I haven't led teams in sales, for example. I've always been leading teams within the context of either of engineering teams or solutions architects, which are, yes, in the context of sales, but still with a focus on engineering. And I would say that the difference is on how you can manage to create motivation within the team members, making sure that you can satisfy their need to deliver something that they enjoy or their curiosity. Everybody has different motivational drivers, but in the end, people that are in the tech industry really tend to enjoy the process of, satisfy their curiosity, build something that works and something that actually solves a problem for a given person. So whether it's a solution that you've built through architecture diagrams or whether it's a piece of code that you're going to deliver, you have to find the right way to make sure that motivational loop is actually constant and you don't overburden it with things that are moving individuals away from that activity. So that's what I found. If you're doing codes, well, you have to focus a little bit more into the actual specifications of the code. So probably you act at a lower level. If you're in solution architecture, well, you focus a lot more on the context around the code. So why are we doing this? What's the organization layout around it? What is it that the product should do? What is it that this guy wants to be? So you just ask different questions, you frame it in a different way. And as well, the velocity is different. In a solution architect team, you don't have Scrum meetings and you don't have sprints, for example. You don't have strict deadlines that you have to achieve. Everything is a lot more spread out. And over there, you have to cultivate independence. And at the same time, you have to keep motivation at high peaks, which is the challenge yourself within solutions architecture team.
Two questions on team productivity. So what would you say, what is the number one mistake that you could actually do as a manager that could actually damage your team productivity or generally, the situation of the team?
Oh, wow. The first thing that comes to mind is over-reporting in teams. Maybe, it's very personal, but I tend to see over-reporting mostly as a leaders, as a way to satisfy leaders' visibility that is needed, but at the same time, oftentimes it doesn't really lead to meaningful work. It just leads to just housekeeping. And And in certain occasions, in certain period of times, that can be stretched to the extent that actually becomes the primary focus of a team, right? Build the next report, and because you don't have the tools, you don't have the data, you don't have the right tool set at your disposal. And even if you are able to build that tool set, oftentimes you don't have the right credentials or the right accesses to build those. Turns out both to slow you down, but at the same time to hit you in your motivation, because you find yourself writing reports that probably nobody will ever read, and that will probably not change much within the context of the organizations. And that is something that can impact productivity, in my opinion. So that's one. But I would have to think a little bit more. Perhaps there are a bit more concrete than
I have different things on my mind, but I saw how that, what you call over reporting, it also leads a little bit then to micromanagement and people
That's
being
right.
scared, be creative and things like that. So I can actually understand why this is actually a mistake that you can actually do as a leader. Okay, let's then move to what you do now, right? So you left AWS a couple of months ago to start your own thing, which is actually really cool, really brave, because as soon as you see, okay, it's more of doing of the same, you kind of, lose the drive and you need to try something else. So what do you do now?
Yes. Yeah, well, after 5 amazing years in AWS, indeed, I started to lose a lot of curiosity, and most of my career has been always been driven by curiosity. Now, don't get me wrong, that doesn't mean that in AWS you cannot be curious, or you do not have enough scope or enough perspective or enough access to information. In fact, you have way too much. You are overwhelmed by how much information there is out there. But within, let's say, within the structure of those large organizations, typically your roles tends to be very strict in a sense. Solutions architecture is still very flexible, but in the end, your area of scope is relatively well defined, is relatively limited.
Narrow. Yeah.
And for me, at some point, that started to become a bit of a limit. It's not a fault of the organization. It's not a fault of the role. It's just the way it is. And I am a person that thrives when I can expand the scope in all sort of directions without having to ask approval to anybody, right? Oh, I'm curious about that. Just go and figure it out. So because of that, I decided to leave and experiment with some ideas that I've been discussing with a former colleague of us, still in the solution architecture team, Steen, which is now my co-founder in Product Mind. And what we are experimenting with is a product and a customer intelligence tool that can collect customer feedback at scale proactively, interactively, by literally undertaking product research interviews with customers at scale, and then helps product managers to identify what are the main value streams out of those feedback that has been collected and summarized. Needless to say, that is highly driven by Agentic AI solutions that are tweaked to make sure that the lag between feedback aggregation and value creation gets reduced as much as possible. So that's where Product Minds is trying to focus on. And that's our bet. It's our experiment, our intuition that we're now trying to validate in the market and, of course, between ourselves in the process of researching.
It fits actually quite nicely to what we were talking toward the end of the last year, so this AI hype is so big and so high that we actually didn't manage to avoid it, not even in BrainBooks podcast, right? So the last 3 episodes in the podcast, we were talking about how AI will actually influence our life, and what are the risks, what are the positive things, and things like that, right? And now it's interesting to see you're also kind of using AI in order to help your customers, right?
Yep.
Do you use AI also for personal productivity, to be faster when you develop your products, or be faster to kind of answer to your customers, or how do you use AI in your personal productivity?
Yeah, good question. The answer is yes, but in a sense that there are so many tools out there that look like magic. When you see the demos and when you even try it for the first time, they look just out of this planet. Wow. But when you start to work actively in it, when you start to actually go deeper into your thoughts, into the output of those tools, you really start to notice shortcomings, hallucinations. You start to see depth in certain environments. That certainly applies for coding agents. I'm sure it applies for everything else. It's just the architecture of LLMs that creates the situation. And in our process of building Part of Mind, we have been through that journey. We started by experimenting, okay, let's use Cloud Code to write the first MVP and see how far we get. And when you look at the output, it's just crazy. Wow, it works. In 3 hours, we had the entire product ready to go. But was it? Well, it wasn't, because it was impossible to scale. It was not secure. It was difficult to build features upon, because the architecture that actually ended up, the software architecture that it ended up writing, was completely broken, if I can use the term. And, in software and in anything that has to do with information, there is one aspect of being facilitated by the first writing, but then there is the maintenance. And you cannot maintain something that you don't understand. So when you end up having these large code bases that are written by AI that you cannot understand, either you or your teams cannot understand, you will ultimately end up slowing down and losing so much time in refactoring and or trying to figure out, okay, where is this variable coming from? Where is this, where that thing has been set? And it is hard to build structures that can actually work. So after so many loops, we found out that the best way to go about with tooling is to not use AI to write fundamental software, but to actually use our expertise to create skeletons and documentation that is very, very well structured, and then use coded agents to kind of do the low-level tasks that are almost like copy paste and just tiny readaptations of a given context. Write a class using this structure, using this type of dependency injection style, use this type of service abstraction, for example. But you always point to something that is already well taught by you as an architect, by you as a developer, and then you just let AI replicate that with this. When we do things like this, we actually gain significant speed, really, really a lot of speed, because we understand the code that gets out of these agents, even if it tends to sometimes deteriorate that quality. But if you are on top of it, you should constantly check it. You can try to keep it at a relatively good balance. And when you do that, you can write very solid backend code and functional front-end applications with this. But still, it requires you as a software developer to be fully in control of what the output of those solutions are. And you as a software developer, you really, really, even more than before, you have to understand what software architecture actually means, because that is now becoming more important. That the importance of designing software architecture is now becoming more important than actually writing software per se. And I think that's going to be the way it will be until there will be major breakthrough in LLMs or other AI, Gen AI architectures.
And what you said, I would just add, admin, something that Alessio, you said that I would say like experience is the most important now to know what you're doing. And admin was a little bit like he didn't want to do this about artificial intelligence, many things about like to be in the podcast. But I just try to explain, because people from IT industry, they're in that kind of bubble that they know quite a lot about artificial intelligence. And people from like from outside, they cannot comprehend so many things. And now you explain exactly what I wanted to do with our podcast, and to explain people that is not everything magic, and people who are really working, that they can explain that still experience is very valid and all these things are important. So, Ermin. Sorry.
It's actually great. So the message is basically, I was right, Ermin was wrong.
No, I'm happy that we are working together, but sometimes he's very humble, and on a way, it's very difficult to explain. Oh, there are some people who they don't know so many things, which is very important to know as well. So we have different targets.
Thanks, Yasmina. Yeah, but Alessio, I agree, right? So already 2 years ago in 2024, we were saying, okay, AI will replace developers completely, right? So, and what it did, it's actually very easy to come from 0 to 1, right? So to create your MVP, to test whether this is something that people would use, to kind of, have your first customer. So 0 to 1 means, from 0 customers to your first customer. But then what you explain, Alessio, to maintain, to scale, to make it secure and things like that, this is actually where it's hard. And this is where you still need people to do things. On the other side, I still think that this has somehow democratized the software industry, in a sense that even if I'm not a technical person, I can actually use tools like Lovable or the Origin AI or things like that, and then code my own application as an MVP, so minimum viable product, so that my partners can test it, that my potential customers can test it, give me the feedback, and then I can actually move. I can test whether this will actually produce some kind of traction. And for that, I don't need developers to do the code for me. I can just, create my first MVP.
Yeah, absolutely. I think under that perspective, the ability to build MVPs and validate ideas has been increased by hundredfolds nowadays with these tools. And the growth of Lovable demonstrates it, right? It's insane. These guys went from 0 to 100 million in 8 months. That's just bunkers if you think about it. So that really proves that we have opened something as an industry. And when people say, oh, we will not need software engineers anymore. Well, actually, I see the opposite. I actually think that we need even more software engineers, because now that there are all of those MVPs being tested, now that the experimentation loop becomes even faster, now that the product managers, business owners, people that just have an ideas can experiment and validate, it is likely that we will increase the need of actually building software that can last. And at the moment, we don't have that capability. So someone has to translate those MVPs into software that can scale, software that can be trusted. And that's a job that for now is a software developer, software engineer job, until we will see major changes into those technologies. But for the foreseeable future, by what I hear from researchers, by what I hear from the real experts into the domain, it doesn't seem like LLMs are set up to change that paradigm anytime soon. So we will have to see a major new technology, which in the context of AI, that suddenly can leap us forward. But again, this is something that we will see over the next years.
Amazing. Coming back to your startup, Product Mind, how did you kick off your startup in a sense of product development? Did you start with, AI and developing just MVP that you will test with your first customers? Or did you say, no, I'm writing everything from scratch from the day one?
Yeah. We did all of those. So we started with an MVP that to be honest was functional, but we weren't really happy with it. And then as we started, both of us, both Steen and I are technologists with 20 years of experience. So we find it very hard to read code that we don't understand. So the moment that we got into the loop, we ended up rebuilding essentially the entire thing by ourselves. And again, use AI as a collateral. Now, in our context, we are building agents, and the problem for us is not so much the actual software, is actually how to make sure that the behavior of those agents is stable, and that's the challenge that we are trying to solve. And for now, there is no coding agent that can help you solve that. How to prompt, right? How to chain the agents in the right way, how to distill certain type of information, how to manage the context, how to make sure that the user experience is well suited for the target persona that you have in mind. So those are all questions that are more about how you structure the product rather than how you should structure the software architecture, which for us, at least at this level, is a secondary problem. The first problem that we have is, okay, what is the experience that we want to deliver? And we are right now, we are literally in the middle of finding that answer. We have a lot of intuitions that we are testing, and we hope soon to actually go out with our first MVP to the public and test and validate whether our intuition has some longer life to live.
Excellent. Thanks a lot. And because this is a podcast about productivity and books, and I see bookshelf behind you, Alessio has said. So, is there a book or books that you would recommend to our listeners to start or read in 2026?
Yeah, maybe three books related to the whole conversation that we just had. One is The Speed of Trust, which is one of the books that I always recommend. I think it's relevant in the context of remote teams because it's extremely important to build trust between team members, between stakeholders. And also in the era of AI is extremely important, even more than before nowadays, to build products that can be trusted. That's not
Mm-hmm.
something that is an easy one to crack. So the speed of trust can help you think about fundamental concepts about trust that are timeless, that are just horizontal, that are really applicable in every context of life and business. Second one maybe is The Fifth Discipline, Peter Sage. It's a book that talks about how to build learning organizations. So how to use curiosity and how to create a systemic thinking within an organization that allows you to nurture curiosity and create motivation based on discovery, based on exploration. So that has been another book that I particularly enjoy. And maybe the last one from Clayton Christensen, The Innovator's Dilemma. So
Mm-hmm.
how big organizations tend to lose their competitive edge, not because of technology, but because of all the people dynamics that actually gets in the way, and how you should try to keep your organization sharp in order to avoid the kind of entropy that eats the competitive edge of organizations. So those are the three books that I would recommend.
Amazing. You just created a task list for Yasmina and me to process in the next months in this podcast as well.
I
For
know that we
Yasmina.
don't have so much time, but there is one question more. Basically, how do you enhance your knowledge? Because you mentioned before how you're building your teams, how you're changing perspective and everything. Are there any conferences, podcasts, YouTube channels, and anything that you are following, or how basically you do recommendation for certain things?
Yeah. Well, nowadays, in this period of life, I would say a lot of my information comes from podcasts and YouTube. To be honest, I used to read quite a lot. I still do, but because I'm mostly focusing on AI, which is still not yet well discussed in literature, it's still a work in progress, let's say. I tend to follow the opinion of experts into the domain. And particularly, there are YouTube channels that I enjoy a lot. One is Machine Learning Street Talks. Is a former researcher that interviews all the most prominent AI researchers and AI figures, and really they try to go deep on the most fundamental problems of AI or the most fundamental aspects of AI. So that has helped me to gain so much perspective into how to think about AI technologies, not just from a technical perspective, but also from a change management perspective, which is as important as the technology. And another one of similar type of podcast is Varkesh Patel. Perhaps you have come across both of them, but it's the same story. So he interviews some of the most prominent AI figures and really asks such good questions, and it tries to challenge the opinions of all of the researchers in order to try to make sense of what's going on, both from a technical perspective and as well from a society perspective. So for at this time being, those are the two channels that I follow the most.
That's great. Thank
Excellent.
you. And since I love literature, is it any kind of literature that you or novel that you like? I think everybody knows about Umberto Eco, and he's very popular in Italy as well. But is any author that you would like to say, oh, I really like his novels?
Yeah, well, in all honesty, I'm not so much into fiction. I'm mostly into nonfiction, but there are a few authors that I learned to appreciate. One is Pirandello, which is a writer, Sicilian writer that was writing a lot about the human mind, the human behavior, the contrast and the inconsistencies of human behaviors. And maybe, perhaps it's just a bias because I grew up into
No,
that.
it's true. I support you.
we were fed with Pirandello all the time. But with time, by reflecting back on what I read about his writings, I keep finding that, oh man, this guy 100 years ago, he was reflecting about problems of society of today that are still relevant and haven't changed a bit. So maybe that's a recommendation for the audience.
You see how it's going to be difficult for artificial intelligence agent to define product, like persona, how it's going to be like very difficult for them because we're unstable as a human beings in a sense, like behavior.
Absolutely. We are not a flat, let's say a flat box.
Thank you so much.
In our podcast, Alessio, I'm known as a party breaker, which means I'm the one who's doing timekeeping and saying, no, we're overtime, Yasmina, again, right? So we're overtime, Yasmina, again. So we're just a little bit over one hour that was planned for this podcast. Alessio, is there anything else you would like to say to our audience before I actually, say goodbye?
Break the party.
No, I would say no, nothing specific. Maybe just thank you for listening. Thank you, Ermini and Jasmina, for hosting me. And yeah, I hope that you found the conversation useful. And should you have any curiosity or any question about the topics, feel free to reach out to LinkedIn and write a message. So I love to connect and interact with folks around on those topics. So feel free to reach out.
Perfect closing words, Alessio. Brainiacs, thanks a lot for listening to us. This episode was recorded in English with Alessio, who's a technology leader, entrepreneur, running his own startup, amazing ex-AWS manager and solutions architect, CTO, so a guy with 25 plus years of experience in technology. Alessio, thanks a lot for joining. I definitely did learn a lot about you and about how to lead distributed teams. Brainiacs, thanks, and see you in 2 weeks.
Thank you.
Thank you,
folks.
Thank you, Alessio. Have a nice day.
You too. Thank you.
Ciao.
Bye.